Welcome everyone. Thank you for coming to Composer 101. Happy to be at MidCamp. If you want to follow along, I have a bit.ly link to the slides. It's mid-19 Composer. The slides on that link are slightly different. They're annotated, and they have screen recordings of the commands I'm going to be going through, but you should be able to follow along. So I need to click on my slides. There we go. All right, before we get started, just a little bit about myself. Hello, my name's Mike Miles. I'm actually from Boston, Massachusetts. Why are you in Chicago? Because I love MidCamp. I've been working with Drupal for 10 plus years now. And I've done everything under the sun when it comes to Drupal. I lead the Boston Drupal meetup. I'm one of the organizers of New England Drupal Camp, which is in November. So you should come out to the New England area for that. It's in Rhode Island this year. During the day, I'm the VP of Technology for a digital marketing agency called Genuine. Genuine, we're a full-service digital agency, so we're not a Drupal shop. Our development team is split across many technologies, but we do video and UX and digital strategy and interactive applications and a lot of great stuff. And we have offices in Boston, San Francisco, New York, and here in Chicago. It's my second favorite office to come to, so I love coming to Chicago. At night, I run a podcast called Developing Up, which is focused on the non-technical side of being a developer. So anything that has to do with having a career in development, but not having to do with writing code. So everything else you need to know to have a career in development. Just starting season 3 next month with a new episode. So check us out at developingup.com if you're interested. Anywhere else, you can find me online at MikeMiles86, on Drupal.org, on Twitter, on Google+, but it's still around until April 2nd, I believe. They're going to shut it down because nobody uses it. So that's my handle pretty much everywhere. All right, how many people in here would say they're developers? Raise your hands. Okay, wow. Like 90% of the room. How many people work with developers? All right. Maybe like 40% of the room, which is weird if you're a developer and you don't work with yourself. No judging. All right. I'm a developer at heart as well. I've been doing PHP development for a long time, and what I like about developers is we're cool people, and I say that very unbiasedly. But I think developers, what we're really good at is getting a set of problems, a puzzle, and making some sort of solution and building something cool, right? That's what, see people nodding their heads. That's what we like, a challenge, a problem to solve. And if you're a PHP developer, you don't mind writing code to do this, right? You're a developer, you write some PHP code to solve a problem you're given, you produce an output, you're like, look what I did, this is great. And you don't mind writing multiple files. But developers, we're not lazy, but we're efficient people. And so we don't like to have to rebuild things a lot. And when we can get over our egos, we don't mind using stuff that other people have written because they're smarter than us. So we don't mind pulling in third-party code to add to our own code to solve problems. We don't mind doing this. But things can start to get hairy when you start building bigger projects in PHP. When you have third-party dependencies that you want to utilize that then themselves have dependencies or cross-dependencies, developers don't really like this part of our job. The reason for this is because we're spending a lot of time managing code and not a lot of time writing code and solving problems. So it's a big thing we don't like to do. Don't get me started on security updates, because then, oh my God, you have to check all the things through all the levels. And so developers want to go on the green side of writing custom code and do less of the red side of maintaining third-party code. That is supposed to save you time. Now, no matter if you're a developer or not, if you work on a company where you build a product for your company or you work for clients, everyone in this room has two things in common on every project they've ever worked on. And that has a limited time and a limited budget to complete that project. It could be an astronomically large budget, or it could be a really small one. It doesn't matter. You have a limited time and budget to solve problems. So the more time developers have to spend maintaining code in third-party code that's supposed to solve problems for them, the less time they have and less budget they have to write the custom code that delivers some sort of value to the project. This is where Composer comes in. Composer is a PHP package manager, which manages those third-party libraries for you so you can spend your time writing your code and focusing on solving the problems you have in front of you. And so what I want to talk about today is what Composer is. Am I missing a slide? I'm missing a slide. Weird. I want to talk about what Composer is, what makes it important, and how you set up a project using Composer, some of the typical structures you'll see. I'm going to talk about the 5 commands you need to know as a developer to use Composer effectively. There's a lot of commands in Composer, but if you master just the 5 I'm going to show you, you can do pretty much anything with Composer, whether it's with Drupal or not with Drupal, anytime you're working in PHP, and maybe beyond PHP. So I want to cover those, and hopefully show you that using Composer on your projects, not only is it relatively easy, but it's going to save you that time and budget so your team or yourselves can focus on writing custom code to deliver value. So a typical structure in Composer, what version of my slides am I using? I think I'm using the wrong version. I am using the wrong version. Give me 1 second. No wonder I'm all screwed up. You get to see all my slide decks. No, you don't. I'm going to hide them. Apologies. Okay, this is better. This is the one I want. I should do presenter view. Okay, sorry about that. Okay, all right. Looks like I'm missing slides and stuff. Okay, let me skip to where I am. You know who I am. You know what this is about. You know about developers. All right. Typical Composer project. What you'll see in this structure is what I call 3.5 things. And this is a composer.var file, which is an executable file. That is the Composer file. It's PHP. I'll explain in a moment why this is a half item, why you may or may not have it in your project. I'll make this bigger too. You'll have a composer.json file, which is metadata about your project. And then you will have a composer.log file, which is the file that Composer generates to keep track of all the third-party packages for you. And then a vendor directory, which is where Composer keeps track and keeps all the third-party code that your project is going to use. This is the typical structure. No matter what type of Composer project you're working on, it's somewhat like this. If you look at Drupal 8 and you're using Composer with Drupal, you're going to see a similar structure. There's just a lot more everything else involved. A more secure version, which you'll see more often, is basically the same, but that everything else is moved into a web root. So in Drupal, for example, this is typically doc root, right? So the Composer items sit above that. And the reason why this is more secure is because your publicly accessible code is in your web root. And so some clever attackers can't access your composer.json file, see what third-party libraries you're using, hopefully find a vulnerability, and then connect to your vendor directory to execute it, because it's unavailable on the web root. So typically you'll see a more secure structure this way, with all the Composer stuff at the root level of your project, and then your actual project stuff in some sort of web root below that. So with this typical structure, to start using Composer, you first need to have it installed on your system. Now, installing Composer is placing this composer.var file on your machine. Again, this is a PHP executable file. Composer is just a PHP script. There's a number of ways you can get this. It's available on any system, pretty much, that can support PHP. So if you're using a Windows machine, if you go to getcomposer.org/composer-setup.exe, that's an executable you can download. It'll run you through setting up Composer on your Windows machine. And it'll let you know if you need to install other things on your machine. If you're using Linux, Unix, or OS X, getcomposer.org/download provides the download information on how to install Composer on your system. Now, when you're going this route, and I think you can do this on Windows too, you have a choice to make, or you and your team have a choice to make. Do you want to install Composer globally or per project? This is why I think of the .var file as a half item in a Composer project, because it could live in the project directory, part of your Git repo, for example, or it could just live globally on your system. There are pros and cons to either approach, and it depends on your team. If you install it globally, you only have to install it once, and you can use it anywhere on your local machine, or the environment, the server you have it set up. It doesn't matter what project, you have Composer available. But then everyone is responsible for putting Composer on their own machine, right? So you're going to end up with people getting different versions depending when they install it. That could lead to some discrepancies. Per project, the benefit of this is that when someone pulls down your code base for your Composer project, they have Composer already available. They don't have to install anything additional in their system. They just have to be able to run PHP and execute that composer.var file. Downside about this is that you actually have to type like 6 extra characters in the terminal when you're running Composer commands. It's not that big of a deal, but if you're an efficient developer, you may not want to do those extra 6 characters. But let's take a look at installing Composer on your system. I'm going to start with it per project and then global. So I'm just going to go to that getcomposer.org download link. This might be a little hard to see, but there's a box here with 4 PHP commands that you literally just copy and paste into a terminal window. So I'm going to copy this first one, and I have a terminal here. I'm in a directory that's empty for demo purposes. So I'm going to paste this PHP command. This is going to download a composer-setup.php file. So let's see it here. This next command here is going to check that file against a hash. So what this is going to do is verify that I downloaded a valid installer so that I didn't get anything that's corrupt. You'll see it said installer verified. It ran this quick check where it checked the hash for that file. If it was invalid, it would delete the file and tell me that it was a corrupt installer, and then I would have to figure out how to start over. But the installer is verified, that's great. So now I'm actually going to run the setup file.
Oops.
Oh, what did I do?
2 P's.
2 P's? How did I copy 2 P's?
Yeah, the P from the first.
Oh, all right. All right. So the Composer setup file, it's going to check my system, see if I have the minimum requirements from Composer. If I didn't, in big red text, it would tell me what I'm missing. But it's a valid installer. So then what it does is it downloads the composer.var file from the Composer website, puts it in my directory. All right, so there's composer.var. Now the last task is a cleanup task. All it is deletes that setup file because I don't need it. I used it what I need it for. I downloaded composer.var, and I'm good to go. I would recommend, when you're using Composer, and Composer recommends that you never keep that setup file in like a repo anywhere, because as Composer changes, you want to get it from Composer and check it against the changing hashes, right? That's typical 101 for downloading code. But now my project is ready to go with Composer on a per project basis. So I could check this into Git, and then anyone pulling down this repo would be able to use the same version of Composer I am. The way you would run Composer is I type php composer.var, and we're going to see I get all these great commands. Like I said, there's a lot of commands here. You're only going to need to know 5 of them. Where's my mouse? I don't know. There it is. Yay, Composer. All right. Woo! Demo's going great. Okay. So that's per project. If you wanted to then do it globally, follow the same steps. The only other thing you do is you're going to move that FAR file into a publicly, a system-wide accessible location. So on Mac, for example, I would say move composer.var to user local bin, and I'll call it Composer. So I move it there. My directory is now magically empty again, but now I can just type Composer, and I have all those Composer commands. In fact, I can cd out of this directory, and I can type Composer, and I can use it there too. So I can now use Composer on multiple projects without having to have that FAR file as part of each of those projects. So again, pros and cons, it depends on what your team wants to do. I'm going to leave it global for the rest of this demo. Great, so you have Composer installed. Now you want to start using it. You want to start building a Composer project. This is where you would create your composer.json file. This is a metadata file, a JSON schema file that contains metadata for your project. You can write it yourself, or you can use the first command I'm going to teach you, composer init. This is going to take you through some helpful prompts to generate that file. Just to cover what that file has in it, it has information that's helpful to you and your team, and then information that's helpful to Composer. So a project name and a description that's helpful to your team. Type for us is just going to be type project. You can use Composer to generate Composer plugins and other things, but we're going to do type project. You can provide license information. Composer doesn't really use that, but it's great if you're saying my project uses the GNU public license, so people know about it. Author information. An important thing that really Composer cares about is minimum stability, which I'll talk about in a moment, and then the require array, which is going to list out the third-party packages you require. So let me show you what composer init does. If you wanted to start a Composer project, you would type composer init. Again, this is going to be a helpful prompt to generate that composer.json file. So it's going to ask you for a package name. I like to follow the pattern of client/project. So here I would say MidCamp /Composer 101. It's going to ask you for your description. This is my Composer 101 demo. It's going to pull in author information. By default, it'll use the system user that you're logged in as, so I'll just leave that as there. Minimum stability, I recommend you leave this blank. What you can do here is tell Composer what version of packages you're willing to download. If you leave it blank, it'll assume you only want stable packages, which I recommend you do. I'll show you later on how to override that for specific packages. So I'll skip that. It's of type project. Great. I don't care about any licenses for a demo. It's going to start asking you, do you want to start searching for third-party packages? I'm going to skip this for now because we're going to do it in a separate step. And then it's going to ask for dev packages. I'll skip this for now as well. What Composer allows you to do is have third-party code that your project requires to run and third-party code that your project only requires for your developers. So, for example, in Drupal, this would be Drush or Devel or Drupal console, etc. So now it's going to show you the JSON it's going to generate. You can confirm, yes, that looks great. I'm going to hit enter. Did I not CD back into C11D?
That's what I was going to ask you.
You guys are supposed to help me out. All right. All right. Let me move this, huh? Move composer.json into C101D. All right. All right. All right, so I have composer.json file. If I open this in Sublime Text, you're going to see it's exactly what it said it was going to generate. Right? Great. So now Composer initialized. You're actually all set to start using Composer for your project. The next question is, though, how do you start finding packages to include, and how does Composer know where to find third-party code for you? This is where repositories come into play. So repositories are locations you can define in composer.json where Composer should look for third-party packages. If you don't define anything, Composer is going to, by default, look at packages.org. This is the official PHP project package library that Composer uses. You can go here right now. You can search for like any type of keyword and find a PHP package that does it for you. It's great. This is where all the Symfony components live. This is where a lot of like general PHP libraries, like for mailers and logging, they're all available here. But not everything is here. For example, in Drupal, modules and themes are not on packages. Drupal maintains its own packages repository. So what you can add in your composer.json file is a repositories array where you tell it additional locations to look into. It's always going to look at packages, but you can tell it, for example, I want to look at packages.drupal.org/8 for Drupal 8 modules and themes. This would be of type Composer if it is a packages type library, which that's an open source framework that you can download and set up your own, or that you can set up your own enterprise one. You pay for that. But you can also add anything you want as a repository. So if you have a Git repo that you use a lot, where you have some custom libraries that you reuse on your projects, instead of copying and paste them to each project, you can connect them as a repository and then just use Composer to download that library that you built that you reuse a lot, which is great. So any sort of Git repo on GitHub, GitLab, Bitbucket, wherever you store it, you can attach it to your Composer project. You can also get more advanced and have stuff that's even protected with passwords and stuff. The Get Composer website on getcomposer.org talks more about how to do that. So great. You set up repositories, or you leave the default one to use Packagist. Now you need to start telling Composer, this is the code I want to use that I don't want to write. This is the require command. So Composer require is going to update composer.json, composer.lock, and the vendor directory. So what it's going to do is Composer requires how you tell Composer, I want to use this package on my project. And you can run it one of three ways. If you just say Composer require, it's going to give you a bunch of prompts to help find a package. If you know the package name, you can pass it, and you'll get the latest version of that package. If you know the specific version or a range of versions you want to use, you can pass the package name and the version constraints that you want. And Composer will do its best to find that version of that package. So let's take a look at all three of these. So first I'm just going to do it with the prompts. So I'm going to just type Composer. I'm in the right directory, right? Yeah. Composer require. And so it's going to say, all right, give me a keyword to find a package. Like every good PHP developer, I want to make sure I can log events in my system, my project. So I'm going to search for the word log. It's going to go do a search on Packagist for a keyword log and return me an array of 15 possible packages. If none of these were the one I wanted, I would go to Packagist, find the package name, and then I could tell Composer that package name. But let's say I want to use monologue, which is the second item in the array. Very popular library. Then it's going to ask me, is there a specific version of this package I want to use? I can leave that blank to get the latest one, or I can specify any sort of semantic version number. So for example, major.minor.patch. So I'll say I want version 1.20.0. All right, then it's going to ask me again, do you want to search for more packages? I'm just going to do one for now. So what Composer is going to do now, it's going to update my Composer JSON file, which I'll show you in a moment, with that package information. It's going to make a call to packages to get project info. And it's actually going to download that code. So we will see that, right, it says these lines here, installing. Right, so installed monologue, but before that installed another library, PSR log. The reason it did this is because monologue has its own dependency on this other package. I, as a developer, didn't really know that, but I, as a developer using Composer, don't need to know that. I just told Composer, I want this package. Composer's like, okay, this package needs these other things, so I'm going to get them for you, which is great. That saves me time and budget from doing that myself. So installed these two libraries, and now if we look in my directory, you're going to see I have a .lock file that was generated and a vendor directory. If I open up this lock file, actually before I do that, if I show you the Composer JSON file, you're going to see the require array has been filled in with an item, monologue with the version that I specified. So now that's listed there. I can commit this to my repo so that my project knows this is a requirement for this project. If I edit the lock file, this has a lot more information in it. Now the lock file, you'll see it has a monologue, the version I requested. It has the requirements, so PSR log, and that's version. This has a lot more information than my JSON file. The Composer lock file is generated by Composer for Composer. It's how Composer keeps track of everything. You should not be editing this. Actually, I'm going to tell you, do not edit your lock file. If you edit it, you're going to have a bad time. But if you don't edit it and you keep it there, what it does is, no matter how you specify what version of a package you may want, Composer is always going to download a specific version, a major.minor.patch version. So then, once you have the lock file, you commit that to your repository, and anyone else who's setting up your Composer project, they will get that exact same version of that package as you have. If you don't have a lock file, they may get different versions. And I'll show you how that comes into play in a little bit. The other thing it generated is a vendor directory, which if you look in it, you see it has a bunch of directories in it itself, like monologue and PSR. So this is all the third-party code. I don't necessarily know the structure of this, but I don't have to. Composer is going to keep track of this for me. I'll show you how you use that later on. The important thing with the vendor directory, though, is you don't commit it. If you're using a repo, you don't commit it to your repo. The reason for this is it's all third-party code. It's stuff that you have no purview into or that you have any control of. And in fact, the reason why you're using Composer is because you don't want to control it. You don't want that burden on yourself. As soon as you commit it in, you're committing a specific version of code into your repository. You're adding a lot of code to your repository, when you can just have Composer set up on all your environments to download that code, read from your lock file for you. So you don't commit vendor. In the Drupal world, if you're using, if you're on Acquia or Pantheon, you have to have the vendor directory checked in. You can get around this by having like some CI tools in place, so you can generate what's known as a build artifact to then run the Composer commands, download the code, and push it up to your environments. But I recommend don't committing your vendor directory into your general repo. You're just going to cut down the amount of code you have to keep track of. All right, so that's Composer require on its own. Let's search with the package name. I'm doing good on time, right? Yeah. All right. So I'm going to say Composer require. Let's get some unit testing in here. So I'm going to say PHP unit /PHP unit. I know this vendor directory and package because I use it a lot. So what Composer is going to do, it's going to look on Packagist for the latest version of that PHP unit package, since I didn't specify a version. So it's going to say using version caret 8.0. So that's the latest version it has. And you see it downloaded a whole lot of code because PHP unit requires a whole lot of other libraries. Again, I didn't have to know anything about this. Composer manages it for me. So this is great. So if we look back at the JSON file, right, you're just going to see PHP unit was added with caret 8.0, and I'll explain the caret in a moment. And then if I look in the vendor directory, right, it has a lot more code in it. Again, Composer downloaded all that for me. I don't have to check it into my repo. I don't have to keep track of it.
Those are all the dependencies.
Those are all, yeah, so far in the vendor directory is all the third-party dependencies your project has. And so PHP unit said, I have a lot of dependencies. Composer, download all these for me. The third way to run Composer require is with passing a specific version. And you can do a number of things to tell it what versions you want. Now you can be very explicit by saying major.minor.patch. Composer uses semantic versioning. So for example, 1.0.1. You can use any sort of comparison operators, however. So you could say, for this package, I want greater than or equal to version 1.0, but less than version 2.0. So I basically want the latest version of version 1 of this package. I don't want the next significant release. You can use wildcards. So you can say, I want version 1.0.star. So anytime I tell you to update Composer, give me the latest patch version of this. You can use a tilde or a caret, which is which marks the next semantic release, the next significant release. It's the same thing as those comparison operators. So this one here, tilde 1.2 says, give me at least version 1.2, but less than version 2 of this package. So you can say a minimum version and less than the next significant release. And then you can, if you need to, pass stability flags. So this happens a lot in Drupal 8, where you want to use a module that only has an alpha release. You can say, give me version 2.0 at dev or at alpha, at beta for this package. This is why I recommend in your JSON file you don't say minimum stability, because it's going to use stable code, unless you explicitly say, for this one package, I want to override that and use unstable code. I find that you have to do that a lot in Drupal 8. Not as much anymore, but when Drupal 8 first came out, you had to do that a lot. So you can say at dev. So let's take a look at using a version number with a require command. So I'm going to say composer require. We already have unit testing. Let's get some behavior testing here with bhat. So I'll say bhat/bhat in version 3.3.star. So I'm telling Composer here that I want version 3.3. Whatever the latest one is for bhat. So I want less than version 3.4. So Composer is going to go do a check on packages. It's going to update my Composer, my JSON file with that requirement, and then it's going to download bhat and any of the code it requires. So it downloaded a lot, and it downloaded the last install line. You can see it downloaded version 3.3.1, so that was the latest one. If I look in the JSON file, you'll see it has 3.3.star, the version constraint I said. So that's great. Okay. So, you told Composer what packages your project requires. I told you not to commit your vendor directory, which has all that third-party code. So how does everyone else on your team or all your environments get that code to use your project? This is the install command. Composer install is going to read from your lock file. It's going to find all the dependencies you have and download all that code into a vendor directory. If the vendor directory doesn't exist, it's going to create it. Now there's arguments about having your lock file checked into your Git repo. You don't have to have it there. And if you don't have it, when you run Composer install, it's going to read from the JSON file, which, since you can have a range of constraints for packages like .star or tildes, depending when you run that install command, I may get one version of the package, and 3 weeks later you could get a different version, and we don't want that. If you have your lock file in place, the lock file always says the major.minor.patch version it downloaded when it downloaded that code, so everyone's going to get the same exact version. So you commit your composer.lock file to your repo. You should always do it. And it's just going to save you a lot of headaches between differences between your team members, between your environments. Composer install, you only run it one way, with the words composer install or PHP composer.var install. To demo this, I'm going to do a little thing, something silly. I have the vendor directory. Let's remove that. All right. So now I just have my JSON file and my lock file. So it's like I am someone new on the project. I just downloaded this repo. I have Composer installed globally in this case. I want all that third-party code. So I run composer install. Type it right here. And it's going to read from the lock file and download all those packages. So I say my project requires. So now if we look in vendor, vendor exists, it has all the code, I'm good to go, I'm ready to start working on this project. Again, that makes it easy for anyone on your team or any of your environments to download the third-party code that your project requires. Now, since the lock file always contains the major.minor.patch version of a package, how do you update code, right? If there's a security release for a module, for example. This is the Composer update command. Composer update, it's going to read from your .json file, check your stability flags or your version constraints, and it's going to then try to find the latest version of the package that matches those constraints. If it finds one, it's going to update the lock file, and it's going to update your vendor code. It's going to download the latest version of that code. It's going to remove any old dependencies or code that's not needed, or add new code that is needed. You can run update one of two ways. You can just say Composer update. Yes?
Does it update the lock then?
It does update the lock file, yes. So if it finds a new version, it updates the lock file. If you just run Composer update, it's going to try to update everything that you have in your require or require dev arrays. For Drupal, if you have a lot of modules and themes, maybe you don't want to run that. So maybe you just want to update that one module that has security release. So you can pass the specific vendor and package name along with it, and it will only update that one package. I recommend running update if you're running like code sprints, if you're doing agile type stuff, at the very beginning of a new sprint. That gives you your whole sprint time to work out any kinks that have come with updates. So, on a Drupal project, you run security updates using Composer at the beginning of your sprint, then you have 2 weeks, 3 weeks, however long it is to work out those issues. And you also have one person in charge of running this. Since it updates the lock file, you only want one person making those updates and then committing it out to the rest of the team. So whether you are rotating that role between your team or you have one person designated to do it, I recommend one person does it. So let's see how this works. I'm going to do it backwards. I'm going to do the package specific one first and then the general one. To do this, I also have to do something a little silly for demo purposes. So I'm going to edit my composer.json file. Let's change our constraints for bhat. So I'm going to now say ~3.3. So this is telling Composer now that my constraints for bhat is that I want at least version 3.3, but less than version 4 of bhat. Find me whatever latest version matches that pattern. Make sure I save this. So now I can just I can type Composer update bhat. Yeah, page. So it's going to read my Composer JSON file for my bhat constraint, and then it's going to find what the latest version is that matches my constraint. So it did. It found there is version 3.5. So it downloads that. Great. So now my bhat is updated. You'll see my composer.json doesn't change at all because I have version constraints there. But my lock file would have been updated and my code would have been updated. So that's simple. And then let's check out Composer update on its own. So to do this, again, I'm going to make another change to the JSON file. Let's change monologue to be, I'm going to say greater than or equal to version 1.20, which is the version we already have installed, but less than version 2.0. So again, this is similar to the constraints I put on bhat, right? I'm basically telling Composer I want at least version 1.20, but less than version 2. So if I save this and I write Composer update with no other arguments, it's going to go through the list of each of my requirements and try to see if there's the latest version. So all it should find is the latest version of monologue that matches my requirements. You see it downloaded a bunch of stuff because the new version of monologue that it downloaded, which is version 1.24 on the second install line there, it no longer needs Symfony debug, so it removed that code. It updated other requirements that the new version requires, so it updated all these other packages for me, which is great. All right, so that's updating packages. Again, I recommend doing that at the beginning of a sprint or the beginning of a cycle, however you're doing it. What if you want to get rid of code that you no longer need? I find this happening a lot when I'm doing my Drupal development and I want to test a module. When I install it with Composer, it downloads a whole bunch of things, doesn't work for my needs. How do I get rid of it? This is the Composer remove command, the fifth command we're going to talk about. So when you type Composer remove, and there's only one way to run it, which is Composer remove package name, it's It's going to remove that version constraint for your .json file. It's going to remove the code from the vendor directory. And it's going to use the lock file. It's going to update the lock file and remove it. But it's also going to find any of the dependencies that that package has that become abandoned and get rid of all those as well. So like I said, you run it with just composer remove in the package name. So let's say we no longer need PHP unit. I'm going to say composer remove PHP unit / PHP unit. So again, what this is doing is reading from my lock file, and it's checking all the dependencies that PHP unit has and cross-checking them against all my other requirements and seeing, are these being used anywhere else? If they're not, we're going to get rid of them. And it deletes a whole bunch of code because it's not needed anymore. Great garbage collection for me. And what we can see now is the JSON file. PHP unit is no longer listed. I removed it from the JSON file. And then if I look in vendor directory, it has a lot less code in it because it deleted all those other libraries for me. All right, so now what? Composer is set up. Composer require is you're telling it what packages you want, you're updating them, you're removing them if you don't need them. You don't really understand how Composer is structuring the vendor directory, so how do you start using that code if you're not sure where it is in the structure of it? One of the things Composer does for you is it generates an autoload.php file. So if I show you the vendor directory, the first thing you see is autoload.php. This is a PSR4 structured file. You can specify to structure it following other structures. But what it will do is it will allow you so that if you include this autoload file, which is always in /vendor/, it will dynamically load classes as you instantiate the objects. So for example, in my custom code, I can just say I require ... vendor autoload.php, and now I have access to any of that third-party code I want to use. So I can say, all right, I want to create a monologue logger class. And as soon as I instantiate that, when PHP runs, the autoload is going to know that it needs to include those files and any of the required files for me, which is really cool. What's really great about Drupal 8, if you're using like the Drupal 8 scaffolding project, or I think just Drupal 8 in general, it has its own autoload file that will handle this for you. So you don't have to even do that require command or require line. So again, you don't need to know the structure of the vendor directory. You just have to know where autoload.php is, and then how to instantiate the objects for the packages you're using, which is their packages.org page should tell you how to do, or their README files. All right, so to recap, because I know I covered a lot. Composer manages project dependencies for you in PHP, so you don't have to do it. You can spend your time and budget doing what developers love, solving those custom problems for your project and delivering real value and using code to help you do that. You install Composer either per project or globally, depending on your team's needs, but it's 4 commands plus moving a file, or using an executable for Windows. Again, it depends on your team's preference. Composer, 3 main parts: the JSON file, which has all the project and dependency information stored in it, the lock file, which is what Composer uses for keeping track of all your dependencies, the vendor directory, which holds all that dependency code. And then the basic commands you need to know. If you master these 5 commands, you're going to be able to do anything in Composer. The init command to generate the JSON file, the require command for adding dependencies, the install command for installing that vendor code, the update command for updating packages based on your version constraints, and the remove command to get rid of the packages and their dependencies that you no longer need. And then finally, you can start using that vendor code by just including the autoload.php file into your custom code, and you're good to go. So with that, I have some resources and links here. So this first link, bit.ly/mid19 composer, is, again, an annotated version of these slides with screen caps and screen recordings of all the commands I ran and a breakdown of what's going on, so you can check that out. Getcomposer.org is the Composer website. It has a lot of great information, a lot of great documents about how to do more advanced things with Composer. And then packages.org is where you can find pretty much any PHP package that you might want to use, unless it's for Drupal or WordPress. They have their own packages libraries, but I assume everyone here already knows how to find Drupal modules and themes on Drupal.org, so you should be good to go there. I know I didn't cover anything specific to Drupal here, but this is going to give you a foundation to start using Composer in Drupal projects if you're not already. and give you an understanding if you search for Drupal Composer or the Drupal scaffolding, what's going on there and some of the advanced things it's doing. So with that, we're going to have some time for questions. First, I'd love to get any feedback on this presentation. So if you go to mid.camp/238, that's the node page for this presentation. Also has a link to the slides, and provide feedback in the feedback form. I'd appreciate that. Saturday, if you're around, there's contribution day. Now that you know how to use Composer, you don't have to be a developer to start helping out with coding, because you can download the code and work on it using Composer. Sunday 10 to 4, or Saturday 10 to 4. And end of presentation. So after applause, questions. Any question? Yes?
Okay, so let's say that I inherit a big project and it's got a bunch of Drupal modules and it's got a bunch of Symfony dependencies and stuff that I may or may not even understand what it's doing to the site. And so personally, and I don't know if you agree with this or if anyone would, but just from past painful experience, I always want to be the person who says we're going to upgrade this module now. I never want to be surprised, right? So I'm definitely like, make sure when I get a project that like my modules are kind of locked down, and so they only get updated if I explicitly update them when I'm ready to, when I have QA resources to test it. But all those other dependencies that I don't understand, so like Symfony, I was thinking the other day, consolidation, what you want to call it. I have no idea what it does, and I should look into it, but I'm sort of in a out of fear, like just like not ever updating those, right? We're just never running Composer update, right? But at some point, obviously, time marches on, you've got to update. So what would be your recommendation? Like do you do it quarterly when you know you're going to have a lot of QA? Or?
So just for the recording, the question is if you inherit a project that has a lot of Drupal modules or Symfony components, and you want to be very controlled about when you're updating them, when do you do it, and how do you do it like safely?
Yeah.
So yeah, it depends again, and I always hate answering questions with it depends, but on your organization and your timeline. So quarterly, well, for Drupal, if there's security updates and you should be subscribed to the security newsletter, you want to update those as soon as possible. And when you update those modules, they may update some of those dependencies, right? Because they require it. For any other just general updates, you could check it. For some of my projects, we don't check it every sprint. We check it maybe every month, or when we've run out of tasks to do. It's like, all right, someone check what are some other updates we need to make to switch from beta to version 1, next suggested release. So it depends when you have the time, because you're going to want to QA it. For the things that are under the hood, the Symfony components, you probably, unless you're including those on a custom module or something, you probably never have to worry about updating those yourself, because they're being used by code that you are updating, whether it's Drupal core or Drupal modules. So you should only be concerned with updating the modules in Drupal core, and that's going to update their own dependencies, and you don't necessarily have to worry about it.
You need to submit the form. It's not live.
I need to submit the form
For review.
for review. All right. I don't control that. Someone will put it up. Thank you for checking, though. All right, there's a bunch of questions.
Question. So say you inherit a Drupal 8 site that was done kind of like the first year and a half, but 8 was even out, so
Yep.
Composer wasn't really something required. Now it is quite often. The site I'm thinking about was on Pantheon too. So what's a best way or a suggestion on how to convert that site over to be using Composer to manage both core and modules?
Whew, that's quite a question. All right, so the question for the recording is...
And can you do it for me?
Well, I mean, yeah, sure, let's talk about that, no problem. The question was, what if you inherited a Drupal 8 project that was built towards the beginning, Composer wasn't necessarily put into place, and you want to kind of get it in there for best practices? It's going to be a challenge. There's a number of ways to do it. One thing I would say is you can add Composer to your project, start moving modules over one at a time to Composer. Like if you search Composer scaffold, or the Composer scaffolding, Drupal scaffolding project, which will, when you download a module, it puts it back into the modules directory, right? So just make an effort of, all right, get Composer set up. It's not going to do anything because you just initialized it, and then start moving modules or themes over one by one so that Composer's managing them for you. You could try to do it all in one go, but you're probably going to have a bad time with that. So just systematically move it over, develop a timeline of how long you want to do it in batches. That's what I would recommend for doing.
Alright, so let's say hypothetically you've inherited a project that was once on Pantheon, now it's on Acquia, and so you've got all Composer JSON that's very large, just similar to what you guys have experienced. But you've noticed that there have been some modules that were not installed through Composer. So you go in, you realize these modules, you don't use them. Let's say EU cookie compliance. Obviously, you can't use Rush to uninstall the whole code base. How would you remove it the Composer way now? The best way to do that, do you add it to Composer, then remove it? Or?
So the question was, what if you have a Drupal project that have modules that were not installed with Composer, you no longer need them, how do you remove those modules? One, disable them, right? If you're not using them, completely disable them in Drupal 8, run the drush command to disable them. I think it's pm-uninstall. Once they're disabled on your site and your site's not using them, just go in and delete the code. How would you do it? You know, if you use drush to install the modules, you could still use drush to remove them if Composer's not managing them. You don't have to add that Composer. Add them to Composer to remove them because Composer knows nothing about them. If you're worried about like third-party code then that those modules have, like libraries and places, you're just going to have to do your due diligence and
Right, and I think that was what I was alluding to there, because there was one that it had some one-off dependency that I didn't even know about.
Yeah.
Whoops, I deleted it.
So, and the good thing about that, not a good thing, but you could delete it and then you could install it with Composer and then use Composer to remove it, and depending on how the directories were set up, it should remove that abandoned dependency, I would assume. But you're better off, if Composer doesn't know about it, just go ahead and delete the code yourself.
Question on Drupal modules in general. You can have the dependency in that module that this version of this module works with this version of another or whatever. Are they even using that at all?
They are, yeah. So the question is, you know, with Drupal modules in Composer, you can have one module depend on another version of another module. And are they using it? They totally are. You're going to find some modules in Drupal that are set with Composer say, we require this minimum version of, say, I don't know, the meta tag module, for example. Like, we need version 1 of meta tag or greater. So when you try to install that module using Composer,
But there's also the opposite where with this version we don't want anything.
right, so it's gonna when you try to install something and you have a version that doesn't meet the requirements that is a dependency of your project, either Composer's gonna try to update it for you, or it's gonna tell you in big letters that, hey, you can't install this package because of these reasons. So you can't install this module because it requires a later version than the one you have installed already. So you have to update that module first. So it's gonna tell you, it's gonna be helpful.
Okay, and the other question that's kind of related to that is you can do Composer outdated, but that gives you the latest version of every module, every requirement, not necessarily what it's going to update to. And sometimes it might be nice to say, well, if I updated, it would it would update to this level, but there's also this level that you could, almost like 3 columns that you could take a look at.
Yep.
And then you could just say, well, why isn't it going to the latest or whatever and figure that out. But to not even,
Yeah, so
it's not going to update to that status.
yeah, so to be able to figure out and see what it's going to take to update, I don't know off the top of my head, but I believe there's a flag you can pass to like Composer update that will say like test this. Don't actually do it, but tell me what it's going to change. And it should list out to say it's going to update these other dependencies for you. So you can just kind of do like a smoke test and see what it's going to impact. I forget what the flag is off the top of my head, but I believe you can just specify.
I guess it just didn't put everything up there. It might say it would update these, but then you don't really catch the difference between outdated and what it is going to do to kind of get an idea of why isn't it updating this or something. I know you can do the command to say, why isn't it updating this to this version?
Yeah, and it'll tell you why. But I also admit I'm not a very big expert on Composer. I know just a little more than these 5 commands. So some of that stuff is beyond me. I don't know how you can get that more information. You were first.
So Composer frees up a lot of time, and the question may arise, what do we do with extra time? Would you recommend playing Drupal 2048?
I would, because I'm the one who built it.
Is that right?
That's me, yeah.
That's fascinating.
Thank you. I can't believe that's still there. But I would not recommend you doing that. I mean, well, if your boss's ask or your client's ask, don't spend your time doing that. Spend your time being more thorough with the custom code you're writing.
So there's easier ways to see Teresa's face than getting to the 2048?
There probably is.
Okay.
You should come to the Boston Drupal meetup. Sometimes he shows up because he's in the Boston area. I didn't know. Is anyone else still playing Drupal 2048? All right. I see people playing 2048 in the train still. I can't believe it. But thank you for.
I've upset a lot of clients by spending a lot of time on Drupal.
When I built that, it was such a time suck. I actually wasted like a week of clients' time writing it and playing it. So I had to test it, make sure it works.
Yeah, I can see why Composer certainly makes sense to update or to keep libraries up to date. What's the advantage of using Composer to update Drupal modules when you can also do it through Drupal Update?
So the question is, what's the value of using Composer to update Drupal modules instead of using like Drupal Update? The value is, if you're using Composer to manage those modules don't live in your code base. You're using Composer to download the code it would go into the modules directory. But using Drupal Update, you have to have the code as part of your repository, right? So when you run update and you try to make a commit or a pull request, it's going to show it's updating all this third-party code that you don't necessarily care about, that you don't want someone to sift through. Using Composer, you just say Composer update. Then you check in your lock file that's been updated, and then on your environments, you just run Composer install, and it's going to update the modules for you. So you get rid of having to maintain that third-party code.
Let's talk about address module.
What's that? The address module? What about the address
Some
module?
modules you can't install. You can only install.
Right now, there's some. There are modules now moving just to using Composer. So that's the other thing, is that they're moving that system. I think it's a great thing to move to, because again, the more of other people's code you can remove from your control, but you can still utilize, the better for you, because the less headaches you have to deal with. There's
And
another.
it's great for backup, because you have a smaller stuff. You git commit, and it only does your stuff, and then you can push it up.
So your repos are smaller, so they're faster, and you don't have to sit through it. There's a question in the way back.
If there's no Composer lock file, can you use a Composer install?
You can. If the question is, if there's no lock file, can you run Composer install? Yes. When you run Composer install, it's going to read from the .json file. So it will try to match the version constraints that you specify and get the latest version that matches that constraint. If you're using all semantic versioning, major.minor.patch in your JSON file, then that's no big deal, because everyone's going to get the same version. But if you're using any sort of wildcards or comparison operators and you don't have a lock file, when I run Composer install and when you run Composer install, potentially we're going to get different versions of the third-party code, and that can cause discrepancies and issues.
So what's the difference between Composer require and Composer install?
So Composer require adds the line to your .json file saying, I require this package, and it runs the install as well. When you run install, all it does is read what you already have listed, and it will download that code. So it doesn't add anything to it.
Thank you. That's good.
Is there any other questions? Yes, in the way back there.
I'm only recently introduced to Drupal, I suppose.
Okay.
And I have more experience with Node and NPM. Is there any pitfalls I should watch out for in learning Composer, aside from the
So the question is, being new to Drupal and using Composer, are there any pitfalls to watch out for? Accidentally running Composer update without any arguments is something to watch out for, because it's going to update a lot of stuff. I think also, for Drupal specifically, even though what I showed you what this basic setup is, if you're trying to set up Drupal 8 with Composer on your own and not using like the scaffolding project, for example, you're going to have a lot more advanced Composer things you're going to have to learn about how to move code into different directories instead of the vendor directory. So for Drupal and Composer, I'd recommend, I've said it a number of times, check out the Drupal Composer project or the Drupal Composer scaffolding project, which you can just clone those, and they're going to have a very robust Composer.json file that will move modules into the modules directory, themes in the themes directory, instead of keeping them in vendor. They're going to handle a lot of headaches for you.
So those would be the two things you'd recommend too if you were doing like a distribution, changing a distribution over to Composer.
Yeah, for sure.
Both the Drupal project and the...
You use one or the other.
So
I think they're one.
scaffolding?
Yeah, Drupal Composer scaffolding. I think it might be the same thing. I forget the name of it. I Google it every time.
What about JavaScript libraries?
So just finish your question. Yeah, if you're creating a distribution, you should find one of those, whichever one you want to use.
Distribution through Drush.
Oh yeah, so add Composer to it and use that setup. So it'll give you a nice base. It's like using an install profile almost, right, for your code base. What about JavaScript libraries, was the question. So the great thing about Composer is you can use it beyond just PHP. So if you have, let's say, you're using CK Editor, which is now built into Drupal core, but you needed another plugin for it, you can add that repository to your Composer JSON array, like the GitHub repo, to it, and then you can say Composer require CK Editor / whatever the plugin name is, and you can tell it to move the code into the libraries directory. So you can use Composer to manage JavaScript plugins, to manage if you're using like third-party or outside CSS and HTML, like design structures, you could pull those in as well. For example, at my company, our front-end team who focuses on HTML and CSS, they work across .NET and PHP, and they build in Twig. So we pull in their repository, because they work in a separate repository than Drupal, our Drupal repo, and we just pull in their code using Composer.
So that would apply to custom modules as well?
Yeah, custom modules, you put in a Git repo. Better yet, custom modules, you build it contrib focusing, and you put it focused, and you put it on Drupal.org, then you pull it in. But yeah, you can keep your own libraries in Git repositories and add that as a repository of your Composer JSON and pull it in that way instead of copying it into all your projects. So you can totally do that.
I built a brand new site yesterday on my development machine, and while I was building it, it said, it warned me, hey, there's a new version of Drupal. And that was the second time that I was warned that there's a new version of Drupal, that there was a zip file I could download from Drupal.org. But when I tried to update it from Composer, it said core isn't available yet.
So
do you know what the delay is?
the comment is, set up a brand new project, got the message saying there's a new version of Drupal core available, saw there was a zip file to download it on Drupal.org, tried to run Composer update Drupal/core, you didn't get an update. What's the delay? I don't know what the delay is. I know there's this, I don't know. There's amount of time, whoever talked to the core maintainers about that, because it should be relatively in sync. When they update the zip file, they should be updating Drupal core Composer's information. I don't know, I'm sorry.
Okay.
All right, I got like 3 more minutes. Any other questions? These are great questions. Thank you very much. It means I did a great job. All right, yay, more clapping. I'm around the rest of the day, and I'm around tomorrow and tonight if you want to talk more about this or anything else.